What waits in the dark place? I used to be a caver. Serious about it, for years. Tennessee and Kentucky have some of the longest, deepest cave systems on the continent. And I would done hundreds of trips, the kind of vertical, technical caving where you rappel into pits in the earth and crawl through passages no wider than your shoulders, miles from the surface, in a darkness more complete than anything you will ever experience above ground. I loved it. I loved the silence and the stillness and the feeling of being somewhere no human had any business being. I do not cave anymore. I have not gone underground in 9 years. Not even into a basement if I can help it. And the reason is a trip into an unmapped section of a cave system in Middle Tennessee, and a thing that lives down there in the dark. And the rule I learned the only way you can learn it, which is by very nearly dying. There were 4 of us that day. Me, my longtime caving partner Reese, and 2 others. A married couple named the Lindquists who were strong cavers we would been on a dozen trips with. We were pushing a lead in a system we knew well, a known cave, mapped for miles, but with side passages that nobody had ever fully surveyed. That is the holy grail in caving, virgin passage, going where no person has gone. We would found a tight crawl off a known room. That blue air, which means it connected to more cave, more open space somewhere beyond, and we would gotten permission and made our plan and we went in to push it. The crawl was bad. 100 yards of belly crawl through a passage so low we had to turn our head sideways, and exhale to fit, with the rock pressing down on our backs the whole way, the kind of thing that ends careers when people panic. But all 4 of us were experienced, and we kept our heads, and after a long ugly hour we came out the far end into open space, into a section of cave that, as far as any record showed, no human being had ever stood in. And it was beautiful. A great chamber, the ceiling lost above our lights, formations everywhere, flowstone like frozen waterfalls, our voices swallowed up in the enormous dark. We stood there grinning at each other like kids. We had no idea. There was no way to know. I should explain, for anyone who has never been deep underground, exactly what kind of dark we are talking about, because the dark is the whole story. On the surface there is no true darkness. Even on the blackest night there is starlight, the glow of distant towns on the clouds. Your eyes adjusting until shapes appear. A mile down in a cave, with the lights off, there is nothing, not dim shapes, not faint outlines. Nothing. A black so total that after a few minutes, your brain, getting no signal from your eyes at all, begins to manufacture phantom light, drifting blobs and sparks and crawling patterns that are not there. You cannot see your hand pressed against your own nose. You lose the difference between eyes open and eyes closed. Cavers train for this. We carry 3 independent light sources each, because to be without light down there is to be helpless in a way that has no equal above ground. I tell you this so you understand the trap we were in. Our lights, our only defense against that absolute dark, were the very thing that would get us killed. The first thing that was wrong, in hindsight, was the silence. Caves are not silent places, not really. There is always water, dripping, trickling, running somewhere. The constant patient voice of the water. That made the cave. But this chamber was dry, bone dry, and silent in a way that pressed on the ears. And there were no formations actively forming, no live flowstone. Everything dead and dry, as if the water had abandoned this part of the cave a very long time ago. Reese said it felt like a held breath. We all felt it. But we were high on the discovery and we pushed on, deeper into the new section. Mapping as we went, and we did not turn back when the cave told us to. Because the cave was telling us in the only language it had, which is the language of an animal gone. Still, because a predator is near. And we did not know how to listen. We found the bones about an hour in. They were in a side alcove, a great drift of them, and at first we thought it was a natural bone deposit, the kind you find in caves where animals fall in and die over millennia. But these were not arranged like a natural deposit. They were piled, deliberately, against the back wall of the alcove, sorted almost. The long bones together and the skulls together, and the skulls were not all animal. Some of them were not animal at all. I am not going to describe them in detail. I will say only that there were more human skulls in that pile than there are recorded disappearances in that entire county, going back to before there was a county, and that they were of all ages, and that some of them were very old and some of them were not old at all. And I will say that the bones had been cleaned, not weathered, cleaned, the way bones are cleaned by something that eats. There was caving gear in the pile too. That is the detail I have never been able to tell anyone. The detail that turned my legs to water in that alcove. A cracked helmet, faded webbing, the corroded frame of a carbide lamp older than I was, and newer things, a coil of modern rope, a chest harness like the one I was wearing. Other cavers had pushed this lead before us. The cave was not as unexplored as the record said. People had come down here, into the silence and the dry dead dark, and they had not gone back up to file a trip report or correct the map. And now their helmets were in the pile, with their skulls, and the only record they had ever left was the air still blowing through that crawl, drawing the next fools in. We did not speak. I think we all understood at the same moment, looking at that pile, that we had walked into something's larder, and that the silence of the cave was the silence of a place where a thing hunts, and that we needed to leave, right now. Quietly, the way you back away from a sleeping bear. We turned to go, and that was when Reese's light caught it, far across the chamber, at the edge of the dark. And we all saw it for 1 second before instinct made us kill our lights, and that 1 second is burned into me forever. It was pale. Caves do that to things that live in them. Forever. They lose their color, their eyes, everything they do not need in a world without light. It was tall, and it was thin past the point of starvation, and it moved on all fours but wrong, the joints wrong, too many angles, and its face, in the half-second our lights touched it, was eyeless, just smooth pale skin where eyes should be, and its head was tilted and turning, slowly, scanning, and its mouth was open. It had heard us. It could not see us, it had no eyes to see with, but it had heard our lights click on, heard the small electric whine of them. Maybe, heard our breath, our hearts, and it had turned its eyeless face toward us and gone still, listening, the way we would been too foolish to listen to. The cave. We killed our lights. All four of us, the same instinct, total darkness, and in the dark we heard it begin to move toward us. Not fast. Patient. The dry scrape of it crossing the chamber floor, the click of those wrong joints coming toward the place where it had heard the lights, and I understood, in that absolute blackness, the rule of the dark place, the rule that the bones in the alcove represented, the rule that every person in that skull pile had failed to keep. The thing was blind. It hunted by sound. And our only chance, the only chance, was to make no sound at all. I cannot describe to you what it is to stand in total darkness, a mile underground, and hold perfectly still and perfectly silent while a blind thing that eats people crosses the room toward you, listening for the smallest sound to tell it where you are. The dark down there is not like surface dark. There is no adjustment, no faint shapes resolving. Your eyes give you nothing, ever, and your brain, starved of input, begins to invent things, swirls and flashes and shapes, so that you cannot even trust the nothing you are seeing. And into that nothing came the sound of the thing moving, the scrape and click of it. Slow, methodical, quartering the chamber. And the four of us stood frozen in the black, not daring to breathe, not daring to shift our weight, while it hunted us by ear in a room the size of a cathedral. It came close to me. I will never forget it. I heard it approach, the dry scrape getting louder, and then it was right in front of me. Close enough that I could smell it, a smell like a wet cellar and old meat. And I heard it breathing, a slow wet rasp, and I felt the air move as its eyeless head swung back and forth inches from my face. Listening for the heartbeat that was slamming in my chest so hard I was certain it could hear it. I held my breath until my lungs screamed. I did not move a muscle. I stood there with that blind starving thing's face a hand's width from mine in the absolute dark, and I made myself a stone, and after an eternity it moved on, drifting away across the chamber, still listening, still hunting, because it had not quite been able to pin the sound. And then Mrs. Lindquist screamed. I do not blame her. I have never blamed her. She was a strong caver and a brave woman. But no one can stand that. The thing's breath in your face in the dark, and something in her broke and she screamed and she switched on her light and ran. And the thing in the dark, which had been hunting 4 silent stones it could not quite locate, suddenly had a sound to follow and a light to home in on and a target moving and panicking. And loud. And it went after her, fast now, faster than I would have believed anything could move in the dark, the scrape and click becoming a horrible scrabbling rush, and her light bounced away across the chamber and her screams changed, and then her light went out, and then the screaming stopped, and the cave was silent again except for a wet sound from the dark that I will not describe. 3 of us were left, frozen in the black, and the lesson, the awful lesson, was right there in front of us, paid for in the worst way. She had run. She had made noise, she had turned on her light, and it had taken her, and the rest of us, who had stayed silent and dark, were still alive. The thing did not know exactly where we were. It only knew where sound was. So we did the hardest thing I have ever done. We did not go to her. We could not have helped her, she was already gone, and going to her meant noise and light and death. So in the dark, by touch, the 3 of us found each other's hands, and we began, in total silence and total darkness, to feel our way back the way we had come. It took us hours. We could not use our lights. Light was sound to that thing, somehow. The whine of the electronics, the click of the switch, and even if it had not been, light meant being seen by anything else that might be down there. And after the bone pile we did not assume there was only one. So we moved blind, hand in hand, feeling the walls, retracing a route we had mapped by sight. and now had to recall by memory and touch alone. A mile of cave in absolute darkness, and the whole time we could hear it, somewhere behind us or beside us or ahead of us, the dry scrape and click of the thing, moving through its dark kingdom, hunting, pausing to listen, hunting again. Twice it came close and we froze, the three of us, holding our breath, holding perfectly still, sometimes for 20 minutes at a stretch, until it drifted away. Once Reese's foot dislodged a pebble, the tiniest sound, and the thing was on us in seconds, and we stood frozen with it circling us in the dark, breathing its wet breath, for what felt like an hour, before it gave up and moved off. I have never prayed so hard in my life as I prayed in that darkness, prayed to be a stone, prayed to make no sound, prayed for the blind thing to lose us. The worst of it came at a place we had to climb. A short pitch up a flowstone slope that we would come down easily on the way in. In the dark, by feel, it was a nightmare. And Mr. Lindquist, who had not made a sound since his wife died, who had crawled the whole way back with us, in a silence I think was the silence of a man whose mind had partly left him, lost his grip near the top. He did not fall far, but his caving pack scraped down the rock with a long grinding rasp, the loudest sound any of us had made since the scream, and it rang through that chamber like a struck bell. We all froze, and out of the dark, from not far at all, came the thing's answer. It went absolutely still, the way it did when it had a sound to work with. And then it began to come, fast, the scrabbling rush, straight for the slope. I found Mr. Lindquist's wrist in the dark and I hauled. And Reese hauled and we dragged him up and over the lip of the pitch, and the three of us pressed ourselves flat against the cold rock at the top and went silent, utterly silent, while below us the thing reached the bottom of the slope and began to climb after the sound. And the only thing that saved us was that the flowstone defeated it the way it had nearly defeated us. We heard it slip, heard it scrabble, heard it fall back with a shriek of frustration, and we used those seconds to creep away into the dark on our hands and knees. Silent as the dead we were trying not to become. We found the crawl by touch, the 100-yard belly crawl that had nearly broken us on the way and was now the most beautiful thing in the world, because the thing was too big to follow us into it. We would seen its size, and the crawl was barely big enough for us. We went into it in the dark, one after another, and I went last. And as I pushed into that tight black tube, I heard the thing reach the entrance behind me. Heard it scrabbling at the opening, its wrong joints clicking, its breath rasping, and I felt something brush my boot, cold fingers, too many of them, closing on my ankle, and I kicked and I clawed forward in the dark and the rock tore my back open and I did not care. And the cold grip slipped, and I crawled the longest 100 yards of my life with the thing screaming behind me, a sound I had not heard it make before, a sound of fury and starvation, echoing up the passage as its meal escaped, and then I was out, into the known cave, into the room where we would started, and we did not stop. We put our lights on at last and we ran, and climbed and rappelled and hauled ourselves up toward the surface, and we came out into the daylight bleeding and broken and free where we had been for. We told the authorities the truth, as much of it as anyone could believe. We said Mrs. Lindquist had died in a fall in unmapped passage, that the section was too dangerous and unstable to recover her body, A recovery team went partway in. They came back fast, and pale, and the recovery was called off as too hazardous, and the unmapped section was gated and closed, officially for safety. I have always wondered what the recovery team heard in the dark that made them gate that cave so fast. I think they heard the scrape and click. I think they understood. I have done the reading, the way you do. The native peoples of that region had stories about the deep caves, about not going too far in, about a thing that lived past the light and hunted by sound, and they had rules about it that the early settlers wrote down and laughed at, and then some of them stopped laughing at. Cavers have stories too, passed around at the fringes, the kind nobody puts in the official trip reports. A disappearance here, a missing solo caver there, a passage that gets quietly gated with no clear reason. I think there are more of these things than anyone knows, down in the deep dark systems, in the parts the water abandoned, and I think they have been eating people for as long as people have been foolish enough to go down into the dark. And I think the only reason any of us come back is that some of us learn the rule in time. The rule is this, and I will give it to you the way it was paid for. In case you are ever fool enough to go where I went, in the dark place, the thing that hunts you cannot see, it hunts by sound. If you ever find yourself in the deep dark, and you hear the dry scrape and the click of wrong joints coming toward you, you do not run. You do not scream. You do not turn on your light. You become a stone. You hold your breath and you still your heart if you can, and you make no sound at all. None, not the smallest, and you wait. However long it takes, while it breathes in your face and listens for the one sound that will tell it where to bite. The ones who run are the ones in the pile. The stones are the ones who come home.